So obviously we've had a bit of an unprecedented few weeks in the history of, well, I think most of our lifespans. I don't think we've seen anything that we could compare to a coronavirus outbreak. And so there's a lot of new thoughts that have to come out and a change of the way we think about the world that becomes important to us. And our priority during periods like this is to really work with each one of you guys, all of our installers, our manufacturers, and really help share everything we know so that we're all on the same page and everybody has the best chance of success in what I call a tumultuous environment, and that's saying it very kindly. So my hope today is to go through a few things with you guys, things I think are pretty critical to sustaining and building a business in what I would call a new environment. And this is, unfortunately, is a new environment and is going to be a new environment, and want to make sure that everybody is prepared as best as possible. And at the end, we'll do our best to take some questions and go through anything that you may have top of mind. Jamie is checking on our side, I think some of the comment boxes, so I feel free to send those over and we'll try to catch those as well. And we'll get into it. So this is just at a very high level. Let's see here. So I always put a disclaimer, but I think it's really important. This situation is changing pretty dramatically daily. What people thought was a reality last week is a different reality this week, and what people thought was a supply chain issue in January is no longer a supply chain issue, but a demand issue. And so I guess as such, I just wanted to caveat everything in this presentation is our opinion. It's not advice. It's just a way of saying, hey, let us share what we're thinking so that we can all be thinking a little bit more dynamically about a situation that is going to be a rough situation. And so I'm glad to have you guys with us today to talk about that. We'll just continue on. This is our agenda. In order of the agenda, it should take us about 45 minutes total to finish everything. I hope to get through these topics in less time and spend some time on questions as well. If you can notice here, we're going to start with the economy going forward. So this is, again, just an opinion, but we bring in some research from the best institutions to have that opinion. And then we're going to talk about how to manage cash flow in uncertain times. And the reason why that's important is very much so that when you see demand and supply interruptions, which we haven't seen in a very long time, and this may make 2008, 2009 look like an easy period of time for many businesses comparative to what we're about to do and go through, it's really important to think about cash flows in a way that most businesses haven't thought about cash flows yet. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to jump into just a very short version of how to think about selling in a world that is a bit bumpy and potentially in a downturn. And what's the value proposition that you may have, and how do you go about thinking about that? That'll just be a high-level conversation, very short, but hopefully spurring some ideas, since I know a lot of people have to think about this on their own as well. And then finally, we're going to get to the next two sections. One on business loans. Where do we get them? How do we think about that? What does that look like? What is the Small Business Association doing? What are some of the emergency plans that are being put in place by cities and the federal government? And there's actually a lot, and it's really important to watch, especially if you're running a business, but fascinating to learn either way. And then finally, we're going to end with what can we do in the best interest of our employees and our contractors and those who we work with to protect them, and also to make sure that during ups and downs, they can get as much pay as they possibly can, even if they can't come to work. So we're going to talk about all those subjects, and I'm going to go through them one by one. And hopefully, as you have any questions, you can just kind of add them to a chat flow for us, Soligent and Jamie, and we will then hopefully get a handful of those that seem to resound most importantly. So let's talk about the economy. This is one of my favorite topics in general. I almost went to become a macroeconomics guy way back when, and so I just enjoy this. It does not make me an expert, but I will share my thoughts on what is going on in my viewpoint. So we'll start with what is driving this change, and I'll keep it very brief. I'm sure everybody here has had a lot of different information on the coronavirus. High level, there's just inundating the news. So I wanted to start with two facets that I think are really important to know as business leaders and as individuals caring for their families. One is, if you look at the left-hand side of this graphic, or the left-hand graphic, left-hand side of it, you can see that we have different mortality rates for different diseases. And so outside of China, this is being estimated, and this is a Deutsche Bank estimated report, and then granted this is about a week old, so this really does change pretty dramatically, but we're looking at COVID around 0.5% to 1%. And that's actually a pretty high impact for a death rate with people getting it. So it's something to really notice and actually be concerned about. It's different than the seasonal flu, which you'll see above it at 0.1 to 0.2%. It's not as bad as SARS, but not many things are, at 9%. Or the Spanish flu, which is one of the more likely examples that you'll hear compared to COVID, and at 2%. So if you take a look at the right-hand side of that left-hand chart, doing this in my words as much as possible here, you get to see the different age brackets of how it affects and what the mortality looks like per age bracket. And you can see that in the age brackets, basically, there doesn't seem to be data on people under 10, which is interesting. We don't necessarily see a mortality rate according to the research that I've looked at. So that's interesting. So kids are apparently, or appear to be safe. That doesn't mean they are, it just means today they appear to be. And then you've got brackets 10 through 40, and the 10 through 40 has a 0.2% mortality rate, similar to a seasonal flu at a 0.2%, but in developed countries that actually can still be quite high. And then you can see the 40 to 49, you get up, you double that mortality rate, and then the 50 to 59, you get up even higher. By the time you work up to the 70s, you're at an 8% mortality rate, and by the time you work up to the 80s, you're at an almost 15% mortality rate. So if this spells anything for us, it's, hey, anybody in your workforce, anybody that you're around, if you're younger and could be a carrier in that 50 plus range, start to actually have decent concern about making sure that you're clean, your right habits, and doing the things that you need to do to protect, even if you've got the best immune system, because that mortality rate is very, very high for that age group. And just pointing it out so that we know, because we don't necessarily always break out and think about the impact by age group, but this is substantially something that hits an older generation, and where the older generation needs to be the most careful out of everybody, including how they keep their house clean, who they let in, how they wipe down their groceries with actually, some form of Purell type substance so that they don't end up with a yogurt container that has a virus on it, and so forth. The second graphic over here is just to give you an idea of what so far people have seen as the symptoms. And you basically have about 80% of people with mild flu-like symptoms staying home who get this virus. But then you see 13.8% as severe and 4.7% as critical. And that 13.8 is hospitalizations. And so we'll talk about that in a moment, about what that means at a very high level. But obviously that can overwhelm a hospital system without social distancing. And that's why we do social distancing. You can also see some other stats here, but I'll just keep us moving along. So just to take one moment on social distancing, and then we'll move off of the COVID slides and go into the impacts of it on the economy. On the social distancing, it saves lives, because at the end of the day, this graphic, you can see that orange line and this moving graphic. Basically, that orange line is how much capacity we have in the hospital system to take care of patients. And longevity and the ability to survive this actually comes down to a hospital system taking care of that 13%. But that can overwhelm the hospital beds in the United States. We don't have enough hospital beds for the whole population to get sick at once. So the social distancing allows the population, one, to not get as sick, two, to actually spread it out so that as people get sick, there is a bed for them, there is treatment for them, and so the mortality rate can actually stay in line and people have the best shot. That's why social distancing is so important, and the protocols that you go through when you're out are so important. And if I had to just give a handful of quick rules, treat yourself as you're sick, because if you're around people who could also share it with anybody who's elderly, or if you're in that group, Purelling yourself, making sure you pretend as if you're sick and that you're cleaning up after yourself. If you sneeze, you're wiping down the area. If you are touching your face, even though your hands are clean, that you Purell yourself before interacting with others or walking around your house. So, the short of it is don't touch your handshake. Don't touch your face, don't handshake. I gave somebody a bow yesterday, which was quite entertaining. We're trying different techniques. We do a lot of elbow touching, but it's not even a great idea, frankly, because it can be on your clothes. Wash your hands before eating. Wash your hands before touching anything. Wash your hands. That's about a 30-second activity. And then I think the other part is your clothes can be dirty. This stuff can carry on your clothes for a period of days and on anything else. So just treat stuff as if it's dirty. Treat stuff as if you were in the ER and you might have some stuff on your clothes. What do you do with them? You throw them in the hamper, you get a new pair of clothes, you wash them in hot water. That's how to think about stuff. And don't bring those shoes into your house. Put the shoes next to your door. Don't drag things in that you don't want. So just a few tips. Again, there's a lot of advice from the CDC online that's way better than what I have to offer, but throwing them out there just in case everybody is busy with business and might not hear some of these tips in their daily lives. So let's take a look and let's switch our heads to the economy. And let's take a look at the coronavirus on social distancing. And the first slide I wanted to share with you guys is kind of a Goldman estimate. And I think the reason why I find this useful and why I find it helpful is it helps us think about how to think about the economy. And as you have a situation where you shut down airplanes, essentially, even though you can fly, nobody's flying, and where nobody's going to hotels and nobody's leaving their houses, you essentially shut down travel. And I'm guessing this is somewhere between 8 and 10 times worse on travel than it was for 9/11, which was a very big travel disturbance, to say it lightly. And when you think about what that means, these are a lot of jobs out there that are going to have a hard time getting rehired, and that's layoffs from hotels, that's airlines sitting idle, that's hospitality. Those are the restaurants we all go out to eat at, and people who've got leases, they've got loans, they've got trucks, you name it. There's costs. And so as you shut these things down and they have to burden the costs, the businesses get weaker. And on top of that, a lot of people are unemployed, and there's not work to be found right now as easily. And I'm not a big doomsday scenario guy, but what I want to point out is that the severity of something like this waterfalling is what we pay attention to. And then we look at the specific industries and we say, what is their impact on GDP? And then we kind of make a waterfall of what that means. And things happen in a cycle. As you notice for the economy, we're on a positive upward spiral. And when you go down on the economic pieces, they build on each other. And as you get more and more people out of work for different things, you can really run into an issue where it's hard to re-engage the engine. And we'll talk about what the Fed is doing to put money into businesses, but it's really hard. I worked for the Obama administration in the Department of Energy, and I looked out for about $13 billion worth of money. And getting that money deployed was actually a difficult task. And you can think about it as you've got your lawn hose and you've got a fire you've got to put out, but you can only pump so much water through your lawn hose. And it takes a while to go get a hose and put it in place that's big enough to put out a fire that's a large fire. And so you've got a throughput problem. And so that's something we as the U.S. are solving. You're seeing it in policy, you're seeing it in other places. But I don't want to point to a doomsday scenario, but what I want to point to is essentially you can watch the different aspects of the economy, you can watch the decrease in their revenues and the layoffs they have, and you can see how that actually impacts the greater economy. This is a good way of looking at that just sector by sector as an example of how everybody can think as a macroeconomist. So this is my second and last slide on the economy. And what I wanted to point out here for everybody is just a high level. So on the left-hand side, you see what have been historical global recessions in gray. And when you look at that and you look at where some of the projections are heading for 2020, we were in a pretty substantial place. We were a bit on the edge with growth. But what you see is you can see a projection where we could bounce back from a lot of these banks or where we go into a global recession. And one of the things the big banks have been projecting is people have been pretty optimistic up until about, call it almost a week ago, even a little bit less. And now they're saying, hey, guess what? There's a global recession coming. And hey, we're bullish on the US. We think we might bounce back in Q3, Q4, but we keep adjusting our numbers every week because there's such new information. Our models don't know how to model this. And so we have to continuously update those models for shutdown scenarios and GDP scenarios and everything else. So the short of it is the models of today don't necessarily predict the future, and a lot of those models come with caveats. People are doing the best they can at the banks to predict, but it's kind of an unprecedented thing since we haven't seen it since the Spanish flu, and that was I think roughly 100 years ago. So as such, the reason why I share these numbers with you guys is I want everybody to be as prepared as possible for what could be a downturn, because being prepared is so much more important than not being prepared and thinking that everything is going to be okay. And I don't know if everybody speaks in real fashion with everybody else. We talk about it, but it's not about the fear. It's about knowing something is going to happen and acting on it and actually being able to do something now while you're ahead of the game versus being able to do something later because you get a little bit stuck. And so from my view of the world, I have a bit of urgency that I wanted to share with you guys about, hey, how are we going to think about business planning for you? And how are you going to think about the state of the world when some of this stuff plays out? And so I'm pretty rough with my view on that so that I can help motivate people in the right direction to really get a good idea of how to think about scenarios that realistically we don't like to think about as human beings. So if you take a look at that left curve, the left graphic, you see that there is projections for potential downturn, and that updates every day. And then on the right-hand side, those are Barclays, week-old projections on what could happen in Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 for the United States. And you'll notice that even the heavy case, which I think we're in and beyond, has a 0.1% GDP. And then at the bottom, you'll see another bank's forecast of 0.4% GDP, but they've got 0% in Q1 GDP for the US. They've got -5 in Q2. They've got +3 in Q3. So they're showing a recovery still. And they've got +4 in Q4. My personal view, again, what I think is that we are going to see a bit more of a dip in Q2 than people expected. And that's going to be an economic-wide thing for the US. That's going to be the whole economy. And we're going to see that we still have a dip in Q3, and that we hopefully start to stabilize in Q4, but it's not a clear thing right now. And it really depends on a handful of things that are probably big debates that we probably shouldn't get into today. But I'm a little more pessimistic than these models from the banks. And I am that way because I've been watching it since the get-go and kind of forecasting what would happen. And I just think it's really hard to start an economic engine once again, unless you're planning for it. And I think on the individual business level, you can plan for it and you can restart and you can work through it. And that's why I wanted to have this webinar with you guys. So I know I'm a ball of sunshine, a massive, massive ball of sunshine, but I just wanted to help us go down this path and at least get you guys thinking about how to think about these things that are hard subjects. If it was a light subject, we would be talking about it in a very different way, and I probably would not be presenting on it today for you. This is a hard subject day, and I think it's just getting down to brass tacks of how to think as business leaders. And everybody, whoever's on this call, is definitely, in my view, a business leader, because we can influence who we work with, who we work for, and those around us to actually think about this in a dynamic way that often is missed. So let's talk about how to manage cash flows in uncertain times. So first, cash is king. So when you have a downturn, the more cash you have, the better off you are, because you can weather a storm as much as possible. And what I want to hit here is think about cash as blood to your body. You may have machinery to pump, but if you don't have any blood, you can't actually make the machine work. People can't come to work, and you can't buy stuff. You can't get out and install. So it's cash is king. And it was a debate. I remember going to business school way back when. It was a debate we had in business school. But cash is king. And so basically, what does this mean for you guys? And what does this mean for every business out there? So first, McKinsey did a really, really good job of putting together some slides. And we're going to share this deck and these links with those who want it. And you can see at the bottom of every slide from here on out, you have a link in blue that takes you to the article that we might be talking about, so you can read it, so you can pull down some of these measures. So, and I don't like to claim things that are not mine. So basically, I've taken most of the things that I think are great ideas and put them together for your guys' viewing pleasure. So when we look at the right-hand side of this, you can see that there is a 7-point plan to thinking about how you deal with COVID. First, protect employees, and there's points around how to think about that. Second, set up cross-functional response teams, something we've even done in Soligent, something I know our suppliers have done, and thinking about how do we actually deal with this? What do we need to think about specifically on the business? What do the next 2 months look like for us, 3 months, 4 months, and how do we plan for that? And then we go into stress testing. What do our cash flows look like? What does that mean if the market declines in volume substantially, and if solar declines by, call it 50% in April and maybe even 50% in May? What does that look like for us, especially when you have a shutdown like we do in many cities, because it's a mandatory stay-at-home situation? And then, what does that mean for the stabilization of the supply chain, which I think is a little easier actually in this case, because I think there's going to be some stabilization there. And then the other pieces are just kind of, what are your customers saying? So you've got to know what your specific demographics are saying, as we do as well, and make sure that we're helping in the best way possible, because we've got to work with our customers to create the business for everybody. And then if we look at the practice plan with the top teams, again, you got to practice through this. You got to think about it dynamically. You got to role play it. It's a whole nother job and a whole nother way of thinking. And then you've got to demonstrate, essentially, basically purpose. You got to think about purpose and really kind of, what are you going to do? How do you think about this? what is the purpose of all this, and how do you actually make sure that you've got a plan in place and throw this into full usage? So one, do you have a plan? And it's okay if you don't, right? But we need to make you a plan. You need to sit down and think about what that plan is. And again, these are just my advices. You don't have to listen to me. And then, do you have a complete scenario analysis? So whatever you're forecasting, what's your worst case scenario? Make it worse. And you can have other forecasts, but you'll start to see the market change. Don't stop at a model you made a week ago when it's a week from now. Keep updating it with the most current information you have and knowledge. If you see drop-off rates with your customers, update it. If you see that you can't install, update it. And that's how to really think about these models, because then you'll understand the decisions you have to make for your business. How long can you support your business if it stops for 2 months? What does that mean for you? What are the actions that you have to take? Does that mean you have to cut non-critical spend? Does that mean you have to do certain things when it comes to furloughing employees? And we'll talk about some of the benefits the federal government and the state governments are rolling out in a moment. What is your counterparty risk on getting paid? And how ready are you to take advantage of potentially the upsides in situations like this? Because there are going to be some upsides and certain times where you can boost and grow. And then how are you managing frankly, just the general cost? So I ask you these questions because as you think about your answers, the thing I want us to think about is basically at a high level, do you have answers to these? And if the answer is no, then that's okay. But how do you get answers to these questions? Because these are questions that we as a business, other people as businesses should be working on answering now, if not already having an action plan, projecting out and seeing this. And I say this because it's all coming suddenly. And honestly, the difference between last week and this week is astronomical. So it's okay not to be on it yet, but you got to get on it is my view of the world. And so I'm trying to add some urgency to that. And I really don't want to create false urgency. I just want you guys to do as best as possible and make sure we as a whole sustain solar. And I help you as best as I can in growing your businesses and sustaining your businesses during hard times. Unpopular truths, I know. So one of the things we've really noticed is that you can be quarantined and your business can be quarantined. And obviously 3 weeks of economic shut off while you're paying rent, while you're paying for trucks, while you have to pay wages and salaries, well, that's definitely going to hurt a cash flow. And as we know about most Americans, frankly, live paycheck to paycheck. Most people can hardly find $400 if they need it. Not most, but a good percentage of the population that you would not expect. And when you come to businesses haven't seen a slowdown like this where commerce literally could stop for just 3 weeks due to a quarantine. It's not a precedented thing. It's very different than economic downturns where you see business drift off, but you don't necessarily see it hard drop for 3 weeks. And a fear-based mindset and people wanting to go to work or even opening their doors to want to buy solar, which I think is a great advantage for them. So the reason why I want to put this slide up is if you work in public works or you work in delivering electrical services or you work in housing or you work in the utility space, there are exceptions to a lot of these quarantines, and you just have to check the rules for the different jurisdictions because it's literally city by city for all intents and purposes. And so the thing for you guys is if you need to get your crews back to work, one of the things to think about is what was, in the area that you're operating, are you essentially an essential infrastructure business? Are you an essential business? And frankly, I think a lot of people who qualify with giving storage to the elderly, helping build critical infrastructure, these are things that are allowed to operate. So you may very well fall into that, and I would very much suggest you look at it specifically. There's a lot of gray lines, and it's just worth really digging into. I know that at Soligent, we operate and we supply storage and energy infrastructure to a whole bunch of critical businesses. So we're doing our best to stay open for those critical businesses because we think it's absolutely important to support them, especially in these types of times. And so that means that our doors will be open for as long as we can keep them open. Super important. So I put it out there to give you an idea of take a look at what's happening in your local jurisdiction. If you can stay open, really think about it. Think about the wording. Think about what you do. Think about the fact that you're providing energy infrastructure. And I'll leave it to you guys to make decisions. Again, these are just my opinions. It's not even close to advice. Just calling it out. So, brass tacks. How do you actually think about a world that's changing dramatically, and how do you frame that in your business? So first, you actually have to put it into a cash flow scenario. So if it's not in an Excel or a different model, then you don't actually have you don't really have a good idea of what's happening over a longer period of time. Traditional cash flows for businesses are usually week to week. I get paid by somebody, I push money out. I get paid by somebody, I push money out, and I think about who I can pay, when I can pay it. That's a lot of small to medium-sized businesses. At Soligent, we work through a 6-month cash plan. We think about it in a much larger scale. And so what I'm asking of you guys, or suggesting or not suggesting, but giving an opinion is probably the best way to say it, is, hey, take a look at some cash flow templates that are out there, and we're going to give you 2 examples that we've seen. We haven't played with these models. We just like the way they look. So you'll have to test them for bugs or anything else. But we'll share the examples with you so you can work off of them and project out what you think your cash flows are for different scenarios, right? Have a tab for a scenario that is a doomsday scenario for you so that you can think about how you survive that doomsday, plan for it. Have a get back to life quickly scenario where your volume in May drops only 50%. What does that look like for you? Or maybe it's just only 30%, right? And maybe in April it's 50%, so you have to think about what those numbers are. You guys will know because you'll be seeing where that is on the front line and having to actually talk through it, and you can adjust these numbers. So what I want you to be able to do is see the future, and this is the best way, in my view, to see the future, and so we'll provide some of those models. Also a fun exercise. Everybody can be a CFO for an afternoon. Kind of a fun way to go. Definitely probably not qualified, but I tried to. All right, so now that we've talked about cash flow, and the major takeaway I want you guys to have from the last 2 sections on the economy and cash flow are, hey, I don't think we're through the worst of it yet, and I do think we might see an economic world recession, and the banks are projecting that, which means the U.S. also gets hit. B, at the end of the day, you can only pipe so much money through a pipeline when people are getting hit pretty quickly, and so that also feeds into a recession, and so it can be very hard to re-stimulate rapidly, so you need to plan for the worst case scenarios. And C, the way to do that is through cash flow planning and thinking about it in a sustainable way, and actually looking at your numbers and then making a plan around it, looking at non-critical spend, looking at critical spend, renegotiating on certain things that you can renegotiate on, thinking about your labor costs and thinking about your trucking costs. Start the conversations now. Don't start the conversations in 2 months or 3 months. It's always better to be ahead of these situations, but you've got to project it, you've got to have plans, and you've got to use your team if you've got a team, where you've got to go through the planning yourself if it's you. Super important. So let's get down to sales tactics, which are always a fun one. So I think at a high level, my view of solar continues to be that in a recessionary period, solar is actually a great offering. If the economy is not doing well, the stock market is not doing well, things are generally not doing well, solar creates a proposition, especially solar plus storage, of one, when all coronaviruses are breaking loose and you can't leave your house and utilities may or may not shut off and people are charging you more money, this gives you a sense of energy security. You can be off grid, you don't have to worry about what the world is doing. And in California, those batteries under SCHIP and a few other scenarios can pay back in literally 4 years in potential cases. So you can see massive payback. So one, you have energy security. 2, and you have lower costs. So that's the second point, is essentially this thing pays back. So it may be the best investment you can make when, as a customer, when at the end of the day, the Fed has a 0.7% 10-year treasury bond, which means they think that that's the interest rate, that's what we're going to grow at, is 0.7% per year for until 2010. Here you're coming along with an offering which is actually an economically differentiated offering that saves money and gives you energy security. It's a pretty powerful thing. And I think in a recession that speaks. The only thing that can change in a recession is people's cash availability, people's credit scores, and the financial markets for short-term lending, the general lenders that you would see out there doing a lot of the solar loans that we do for residential. But in the past, we've seen that though the rates go up, they go up actually at a rate that we could probably stomach as in selling it as customers, and the interest rates have come down, which has also been helpful for those as well. So there are ways to build in some of those costs. It doesn't go up as much as other unsecured debt like credit card debt. It basically has a more stable actually cost. So the short of it is, I think some of those markets will hold over time. We might see some changes, but think about the value proposition that you've got and that you have to offer at a high level. So let's talk briefly about some of the pros and cons of the current situation. First, a pro. Everybody is home. So they're probably a little bit bored out of their gourd. They probably would entertain an intellectual or interesting conversation potentially. They're also probably scared. So you're up against a few different forces that we all know. And you're probably not top of mind when you give them a call, but you might be top of mind in some cases. People do think energy security. They do think, hey, with COVID and we're hitting the summer season, high winds that can knock down power lines. I could be out of power and have sick people, and that becomes a real issue. So I kind of need to do something about it. And also, frankly, if people's FICO scores are going to change, use your FICO while it's good. I mean, that's not my advice, but that's a thought that goes through my head to share, and something that they can get real value out of the returns dollars to them when they might not be able to borrow those dollars later. And I'm not advising to make bad financial decisions, just an interesting thing that I think is worth noting. So sometimes those decisions are super helpful to actually create some urgency, or those conversations are helpful to create some urgency. So basically, how do you overcome some of these things? So first, you've got to be cognizant that when you walk into somebody's home, if they let you in, that you have to overcome the fear and the recession. But it's a great conversation topic, and it leads right into the value proposition that we have in solar and storage. So in many ways, it's actually a pretty phenomenal lead-in, and it's worth having, because you're providing security, control, savings, et cetera. Secondarily, how do you get into the house? So what we've been seeing is a handful of things, and for better or for worse. One, we've been seeing that people are canceling appointments because they're scared of, they're definitely scared of the coronavirus, and that obviously makes intuitive sense. Two, those who sit with people in their homes actually sit longer right now. And when you sit longer with a customer, you close more. So close rates can go up if you're getting the fit. People have time, they're not going anywhere. And so it actually makes a difference when they don't run off, and you can actually have a real conversation about the value. And also, usually the whole family's home. So you're getting both decision makers in one sitting, and you're offering them a real value proposition in a place where they may feel like they've lost a lot in the stock market or other places. So this can be turned into a way of actually having something to be proud of and saving money while securing the best future for your home and your family. And I think the other piece is this: how do you change your tactics in a world where the tactics are changing? So what I mean by that is everything's more virtual. And so what can you use? Can you call customers and set up a phone appointment and do a Zoom meeting like we're doing today? Can you start to use some of the tools that were non-traditional and set a background? So the background I put on, I'm in my office, but I put this on for an example. I'm not in New York City. I think that's New York. But that background is not a real background. So all of a sudden I could be just about anywhere, and I could be selling, and I could come off very professional. I'm in my office, so I am decently professional, but that's a cooler background than my office, frankly. And essentially, I could have a professional presence. I could give confidence. I could give certainty. I could dress nicely. And if I can get somebody on a Zoom or another form of conference call, I may be entertaining to them. I can walk them through the value prop. So can I get 30 minutes of their time or 15 minutes of their time when they're remote? And the other piece is I can call in a manager or a better closer than I am and have them jump into a Zoom via text, and they can hop into my Zoom, and I can bring on my manager and have them help close somebody once I have them on the phone. So there's different techniques that you can use when you're virtual in a way that's actually super helpful. And other people can sit in on those types of calls. So look, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I do expect the sit numbers to drop. I do expect the lead numbers to drop. But what I'd suggest thinking about is how do you maximize for your business using this new version of technology that we're going to have to move to, Zooms, virtual meetings, and actually thinking about it as a benefit to a customer of saying, hey, I'll teach you everything you want about solar. If you're stuck at home, you should learn this stuff anyway. Even if you don't buy from me, it's a cool thing. And then how, when you get in the home, do you take advantage of the sit times that may be worthwhile for you to actually be transformational to your business? So hopefully that gives you an idea of just different techniques. These are idea starters. They're not, I'm not advocating for one thing or the other outside of just trying to spur some difference of thought of how to use this transformation to actually create sales in a world where the sales might be dwindling when people are in lockdown. And you can't necessarily walk to their house and sell them solar. It's probably not critical, but you can certainly know their home and get them on a phone. Or get them on a Zoom, or walk them through how they can actually save money in a solar world now that they're home and they finally have time and you've commiserated with them on the phone. You have to figure out your best tactics. I'm just throwing out some spaghetti for your wall. So, all right, now that we've gone through the selling aspect and just kind of thrown some ideas there, I wanted to get into some more brass tacks about business loans. So running a business is not easy, right? You've got a lot of people to care for. I feel very lucky that at Soligent we've got a lot of people who care for each other, and I feel very blessed to have a great team. And I hope you guys, in a time of turmoil, can help your team come together as well and think about how you get everybody working on the same page to create change together. I think it's, to me, super important. It's definitely not easy, and there are ups and downs. The number one thing is communication. But we'll get there in a moment, but when we talk about the business loans, I just want us to be thinking about how do we keep your businesses afloat during times of turmoil, and how do you get on this before everybody else gets on it? So let's take a look. You'll notice a link here on this page. There's a list of different disaster relief programs that are being updated. So I wanted you to have that. And that will show you a lot of different things. The biggest ones that have been put in place pretty instantaneously, and look, the government's going to probably put in $800 to $900 billion of money into the government or into the U.S. markets. They put in a few billion to date, but there's a lot of stuff going on in Congress. So you're going to see more and more money flow. And the catch is, how do you take advantage of it? How do you allocate people or a person to go after this and collect this who's really good at it so they can help support your business? So the first, and probably the best thing for everybody's business who's listening, is there's a $2 million small business administration loan that anybody can get if they're feeling the financial stress. And frankly, that's going to be every business across America, in my view. They have certain zones right now, mostly California, and then other states, but that's going to expand very, very rapidly. So if you're listening to this and you're not in a zone today, that zone will probably be updated within a week, and you'll probably be on that list. So what does this mean? One, $2 million can really change your cash position, but it's going to take a few months to get this, just because if you think about how many people are going through that fire hose or that lawn hose, it's a lot of people, and there's not enough people to actually call you back when you're thinking about building a business, building a channel of this size to help every small business. So get in there early, start the process, even if you don't need it. Think about going through that process if you think you might. Two, your interest rate will not exceed 4%. So it's really, frankly, a great loan, and it's a 30-year loan. So think about that. I do believe they may require personal guarantees. You already have a personal guarantee. For other things, then this is similar. If you don't have personal guarantees and don't like them, you have to probably talk to them about that. I don't know how that plays out, but I wanted you at least to know about this option. And on the right-hand side, you can see very clearly there's more stuff for the SBA administration and just ways of getting in touch. Second, cities like San Francisco's Office of Economic Development and a lot of other cities and a lot of other states will be offering massive amounts of massive programs to help. And so you're already starting to see places like San Francisco add deferral of business taxes and licensing fees, provide immediate relief for smaller businesses of $10,000 grants to micro businesses, so small businesses. Basically they're seeking state and federal dollars to bring that to everybody in the San Francisco area. So each one of your cities and each one of your states will have programs. It's just being on the lookout to find these and capture them in your daily life. We've linked the states we know about so far. You can click on those links when you get this presentation, but we want you to know what's available because it's a lot. And so the other thing is, look, Congress is pushing through with a lot of different things, from small business loans to payroll tax cuts. Think about 2% to employees. It'll go 2% of their salary goes back to them essentially, which becomes pretty substantial. I believe that's the exact number, but you do need to check that. There's certain tax rebates, universal income is what some people are calling it, for a period of time. So there's a lot coming out. I'm not going to go into depth because if you want to read, I'm sure it's posted on lots of different blogs, but I wanted to share. And I wanted to get to what I think is the most critical thing. People are everything, and frankly, it's the only thing that makes a business go around. We're made up of people. We're made up of relationships. It's a big family, and so thinking about how you take care of your people, even when you go through turmoil, to me is a super important characteristic of great leadership and what we all strive to do. And it's not easy, it's not perfect, and you'll never do the best in the world job, but I want everybody to strive if they can. So let's take a look at what's there to help employees. One is there is a lot of aid going to people who have to take sick leave for a sick person in their family, school shutdowns, or on top of that, for themselves if they get sick or they feel sick and they have to stay home. So the federal government is providing a lot of capital there. And what they do is they reimburse, and obviously all this stuff is in flux, they're planning to, this is going through, I think, today, tomorrow, theoretically it might have just gone through, but they are planning to, we'll say, allow for a company like Soligent to give people 14 days of paid leave if they're sick or they have to take care of their family, and then reimburse us for that paid leave so that it's on the government. But it only goes up to a certain amount of dollars and a certain salary level for each person. And so in the appendix for this, you can read more about it. I want to say it's about $4,000 a month is kind of the max of how to think about it. And then they've got long-term leave dollars and other things. But you'll get this PowerPoint. You'll see in the appendix that there's some details. You can click on the links to find out more. And this is all being approved as we speak. And I think it might have been approved yesterday. Also, I wanted to share that each state has very substantial benefits when it comes to employees. So there's disability insurance, there's paid family leave, there's unemployment insurance, and these are state-based things. There's paid sick leave, there's worker compensation. So you can get substantial amounts of dollars and benefits. If you're an employee and you need to take time off, there's this. If you're the head of HR and you need to figure out what you can do for your employees, the states have these things, and I'll give you these charts, which are just my opinion, in our opinion. But you'll have to do your own deep dive. But there's money there, and there's a lot of money for employees. So I just want everybody to be aware that using these things really helps if you have to let your workforce sit for a bit of time or lay them off for a period or make them take sick leave because your business can't take that overhead while you have no business. There's a lot of money out here to support your people. So how you do that is super important, and that's what we work through a lot over here. It's the how, because life gets hard, but it's how we deal with each other and how we treat each other that matters. And then finally, we talked about this, but do prioritize, in my view, again, only my opinion, employee health and safety is the top priority. Follow precautions, wear masks, wear gloves, use Purell, give the same advice. If you're running warehouses that have to stay open, do safety meetings daily. Communication is by far the most key thing, right? We need to be communicated with. Outside of, if we don't have communication, it feels like chaos. We feel like we're in an entropy state. So communication is key. So just keep those communication channels open and communicate in a calm, substantial way with your team, just so they know what's happening. Do a phone call for 10 minutes in the morning every other day or every day. You name it. Just have that touch point. You'd want to be touched. I want to be touched. We all want to be touched when there's a bit of turmoil out there. We just need that. We're human. And then implement work from home practices where possible. And what I mean by that is, look, you can go onto Zoom, you can go onto a lot of these other, even Google has it built in with, sharing and phone calls and everything else. So as long as somebody has a good internet connection, they can potentially use their phone as well as a connection and hotspot in the short term. But as long as they've got a good internet connection, the major thing there is just setting them up to be productive. And it's a different work style. So you actually, if you have employees that don't work from home traditionally, you have to manage them a bit differently because they're not used to it and the manager's not used to it. So you need to be in more constant contact until you get a pattern going. The second part is there's ways to work effectively. So you can sit on a couch and have kids running around all day long because they're home, or you can nestle out a place in your house, and then you can ask your employer, if you're an employee, to take home the monitors or whatever your workstation is at work and make a workstation for yourself. And make sure you're sitting in a chair that doesn't hurt you. You can take home your chair if you need to. But set up a place of work. And if you're a manager, ask your employees about where they're working, ask them about their setup, help them set it up, help them think about taking home or getting the right things to have an office set up, even if it's ordering a handful of things from Amazon, wherever you might need to go to get those things, because productivity is super important. And it's really hard to be productive on a couch all day long. It might be a nice break. It's really hard to be productive in a noisy environment. So where is your spot and how are you going to do that? And then how, as a manager, are you helping your employee be effective? Because people are scared, and also working from home is very different than working in person. So what do you need to do to be an effective manager and to keep everybody moving forward? Because that's what's in the best interest of everybody. Keep the business running, keep people employed, and so forth. So I'm going to stop there. I am more than happy to take some questions. I'm just going to summarize briefly, and obviously I said 45 minutes, and we are at 48 minutes. So, stay on at your own peril, but you are more than welcome to stay on. And Jamie, I'll give you a chance to kind of voice up if you've got some questions or any direction there. And then before we get to those questions, I just want to summarize at a very high level. One, COVID is dangerous, but it's differently dangerous to different populations, and you can communicate it. Two, the economy is constantly changing, and every projection of every individual is, of every bank is constantly changing. So just because you see a projection today doesn't mean that's what the market will think, that's what the banks will think, and so forth. I don't personally think we bottomed out yet. I think it's very hard to model a situation like this because we're good at modeling history. We're not good at modeling things where we didn't have sophisticated bankers that happened 100 years ago with the Spanish flu. It's just not something we're good at modeling when it hasn't happened repetitively before. So frankly, usually the models will be a bit optimistic. So plan for the worst. Plan for a decrease in your volumes. Don't plan for a sunny day when it comes to cash flows. Do your cash flows, plan for the worst. If you plan for the worst, your worst case scenario, if you have survival in the worst case scenario, as you plan, is that you survive. So do all that hard work, get to grinding and build out now. Super important. And then there is a value proposition to be had on the sales side. You can sell, you can close. You got to think innovatively. Who's your team in your company who really thinks innovatively? Who's your person? Who's your spider team who's solving that problem for you? Because those dollars, that's your cash. So you need to figure out how you sell in an environment where the selling techniques are changing. I gave you some thoughts about working remote. You guys have better thoughts than I do. But I want you guys to think about selling, and we are seeing the decline in the ability to get into the home, which you would expect right now. So I think it's super important. And finally, on the employee side, on the loan side and then the employee side. On the loan side, there are dollars out there, these SBA loans, and there'll be more. So have somebody watching your state, your city, and the federal things, and start applying now. Don't wait, get ahead of the curve, because as with anything, you think about the one person or five people who were in the SBA office and were doing this, and then now all of a sudden they've got to administer like billions of dollars. Well, that's a lot more work for that person. They've got to hire, but they've got to train up after they hire. And so you get this lag. Get in early, get there now. And then I think, even if you don't need it, because you might. And then I think when it comes to the employee side, look, employees are everything. Our team is everything. Make sure they know that. Make sure that, I know you guys think that way. Make sure they know you think that way, because we're in it together. And even if you have to do layoffs, even if you have to go through hard times, you're still in it with your team. Those are the people you've chosen to be around you. Those are the people, if you're on the team, you've chosen to be around. It's an active choice, and I think it's important to work together through hard times and do what it takes. And there's a lot of options for doing that. And finally, I'll just say, look, I know this is a hard thing to discuss. I know we're better off as a group thinking through it as a group. I'm going to send out, or we're going to send out a survey where you can click, and there's a link here as well. And let us know if you want to be part of a group discussing these things, sharing ideas, because it's not about are you better than your competition today. It's really about what do the next 8 months look like of your life, and how do you support the people in your life that you need to support? Oh, I got no lights. You can't tell because I have a background. Okay. There we go. Lights are on. So how do you support the people that you need to support? And I think that's super important. So I'll stop there, but we'll do those groups if people have an interest, and they can share it with others who would have an interest. I'd encourage business leaders, the C-suite, to join those types of groups, just so we can have the most impact.